It was supposed to be a quick errand. Pop into the vintage clothing shop to buy a new blazer for my cousin's wedding next month. I'd been putting it off for weeks, stubbornly clinging to the notion that I could find something suitable in my overstuffed closet. But the big day was rapidly approaching, and desperate times called for desperate measures. The store itself looked nondescript enough from the outside. A simple brick building on the town's main drag. A hand-painted sign hung overhead bearing the name Camille's Curios in an elegant script. Despite its unassuming facade, the place had gotten rave reviews online for its quality of vintage wares at reasonable prices. As soon as I pushed through the door, the overwhelming stench of mothballs and decaying fabric assaulted my nostrils. I coughed violently, eyes watering, as I squinted to make out my surroundings through the dim lighting. Rows and rows of clothing racks stretched out before me, the hangers sagging under the weight of crushed velvet dresses, sequin tops, and bell-bottom jeans from decades past. Tucked away in the shadowy corners of the cramped space were dusty mannequins clad in fashionable finery, their blank, lifeless stares boring into me as I shuffled farther inside the labyrinth of clothing. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly. "Is anyone here?" "Just a minute, dear," a voice emerged from the back room. The floorboards creaked with each ponderous footstep until a wizened old woman emerged, lips stretched into a thin, tight smile. "Welcome to Camille's. Did you need any help finding anything in particular today?" She chirped in an excessively sweet tone that put me even more on edge. Forcing a polite grin, I explained about needing a blazer for the wedding next month. The old woman nodded knowingly and waved a bony hand toward the far left corner. "Right this way. We've got a lovely selection of suit jackets and blazers just over here." As I trailed along behind her, something in my peripheral vision caught my eye. A mannequin standing alone in a beam of pale light filtering through a grimy window. There was nothing inherently creepy about its features. In fact, with its immaculate porcelain complexion and soft brown ringlets, it could almost be described as beautiful in an eerie, doll-like way. No, it was the mannequin's posture that stopped me dead in my tracks. While all the other figures remained frozen in their typical modeling stances, this one's arms were bent at unnatural angles. Its mouth was open unnaturally wide as if mid-scream. An invisible force seemed to be contorting its body, twisting its limbs into an agonized pose. "Something catch your eye, dear?" The old woman must have noticed me staring because she suddenly materialized at my side. I jumped at the sound of her voice, but quickly recovered. "Oh, no, it's nothing, just admiring that mannequin over there." Following my gaze, she let out a soft chuckle. "Ah, yes, quite an unusual model, isn't she? Did you know those mannequins used to be a hot novelty item back in the 50s? Stores would have them posed in terrifying distorted shapes to grab people's attention as they were passing by." "How charming," I choked out with a nervous laugh of my own. The old woman's eyes glittered with an almost sinister mirth. Some folks even believed they were modeled after real people, the faces and bodies frozen in twisted masks of agony from their dying moments. I barked out a strangled cough, eyes widening in horror. The old woman cackled, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, I'm just having a little fun with you, dear. Surely you didn't believe such an old wives' tale. Now, about that blazer you were looking for." My heart was still pounding as I followed her to the rack of suit jackets, a fact I blame entirely for why I didn't notice the mannequin's position had shifted ever so slightly until I heard a soft creak behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing, as the creak rose to a dull groan, like straining wood being bent to its limits. Gathering every ounce of courage, I whipped my head around. My breath stuck in my throat as I watched, transfixed in horror, the mannequin's arm slowly lifted up inch by agonizing inch until it was reaching directly toward me. Its mouth stretched wider in a silent scream as its head lolled from side to side. "Did you see something else you like?" The old woman was back at my side, peering up at me expectantly. "That That mannequin, it's moving! I choked out, unable to tear my eyes away from the nightmarish scene before me. The old woman's pale lips twitched downward into a deep frown. Oh, silly me. I must have forgotten to turn her off before we opened this morning. Before I could react, she scurried over to the mannequin, deftly reaching around to its back until we heard a soft click. Instantly, the figure stilled, arm dropping limply at its side once more. There, that's much better. She shuffled back over to me, smiling. It's just an automated model, programmed to start in a grabbing position to catch people's eyes. My heart was still jackhammering in my chest, but I managed a weak grin, embarrassed at being so rattled by a simple trick mannequin. Right, sorry, it just startled me for a second there. The old woman chuckled. No need to apologize, dear. Why don't you take a look at some of these jackets and let me know if any catch your eye? With shaky hands, I flipped through the hangers until a classic black blazer stood out among the others. This one looks lovely, I think. Excellent choice. The old woman's voice drifted out in a cracked rasp. She snatched the blazer off the rack, her bony fingers constricting around the fabric like skeletal claws. Holding it up in front of me, her eyes bored into mine, unblinking. Why don't you try this one on? She hissed, flashing me a grin. Something felt unsettling about her grin. A chill ran down my spine, the tiny hairs along the back of my neck standing on end. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of this place, to run and never look back. But I remained rooted in place, some invisible force seeming to paralyze me. The woman let out a noise that could almost pass for a giggle. The fitting rooms are right over here. She turned with agonizing slowness. I found myself compelled to follow as she headed deeper into the dimly lit recesses of the store. Finally, we reached a secluded area of the shop, a fraying velvet curtain separating the room from the rest of the store. The old woman pulled it aside with a flourish, gesturing me inside with her free hand. I'll give you a moment to get settled. Just let me know if you need any assistance, she wheezed, the hint of a leer twisting her features. I ducked under the curtain into the small, closet-like space. As soon as the heavy fabric fell closed behind me, enclosing me in near total darkness, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. My chest felt unbearably tight, each shallow inhalation like trying to breathe through a tiny straw. The shadows seemed to press in from all sides, marauding tendrils of inky blackness creeping across the scuffed hardwood floor. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, I saw it, a humanoid shape in the corner, swathed in tattered rags. The twisted form resolved itself into the unmistakable silhouette of a mannequin. Unlike the standard featureless plastic models, this thing looked almost alive, its cracked face frozen in a perpetual scream of anguish. Its arms extended toward me, beckoning with curled fingers as if imploring me to join its torment. My heart was thundering like a jackhammer, sweat rapidly beating across my forehead and upper lip. This was no ordinary store. I had to get out of here before whatever fresh hell this place had in store could unleash itself. With a trembling hand, I reached for the heavy curtain, fingers brushing against the thick velvet. That's when I heard it, a haunting noise. It was a creaking sound, like before, but a much more pronounced, much more intent. Slowly I turned, already knowing in the deepest pits of my being what I would find. And there it was, the mannequin contorted into a deranged caricature. Those empty sockets seemed to bore straight into my soul. At that moment, my mind simply snapped, all rational thought consumed by the relentless tides of primal terror. I screamed until my throat was raw, clawing madly at the curtain, desperate to escape this nightmare-given form. Finally, I found myself stumbling back out into the main store, legs shaking so violently I could barely remain upright. The old woman stood there watching, amusement lighting up her deathly features. I had to get out. Now. Without wasting another moment, I turned and ran, heedless of the prickling sting of aged pins piercing the soles of my feet. I ran and ran until my chest burned and black spots swam in my vision. And finally, mercifully, I reached the exit, throwing myself outside into the cool evening air. But as I paused for breath, bent over with hands braced against my knees, My eyes went wide in horror. There, out through the dusty storefront window, were the mannequins, all lined up together. Arms raised, pointing in my direction, and their mouths hung open as if silently screaming at me, announcing that I was next on to join the twisted gathering of damned souls.